I am Amaroko, and I speak to you plainly, the way one might sit across from a friend and tell the truth without rushing it. I was born in Enugu State, Nigeria, and what I am about to share is not something I ever wished to carry back into my mind. But here we are. You see, for years I wasn't just a witch. I held a role we called a questioner, and that role, though it sounds simple, was more important than most people would ever imagine. Not every witch casts spells directly. Some of us, like I was, gathered information because in that kingdom, nothing happens blindly. Before any attack succeeds, questions must be answered, and the clearer those answers are, the more precise and dangerous the outcome becomes. I was initiated when I was 17 years old, and it didn't begin the way people think. There was no dramatic flying, no loud rituals at the start. It began quietly with curiosity. There was a woman, my aunt's auntie, informer, and she had a way of asking questions that felt ordinary on the surface but carried something else underneath. At the time, I didn't understand it. She would call me over and ask things that didn't seem to connect. She would say, "Your friend Shama, what time does she sleep?" Or "That boy that likes you, where does he usually eat?" I thought she was simply being inquisitive, maybe even nosy the way some elders are. But I stayed and I answered because it felt harmless. Then one night, everything changed. I remember it clearly, down to the minute. It was around 2:15 a.m. And I know that because that was always the time they came. Yeah. Felt something heavy pressing on my chest. Not pain exactly, but a weight that told me I was no longer alone. Then I heard her voice, not outside the room, but inside my head, calm and certain. She said, "Come, it is time." Before I could even gather myself, I was no longer in my room. Just like that, I found myself standing in a large, dark compound. There were women all around me, some old, some young, and some that didn't look fully human. That was the moment I understood something most people don't. Witchcraft is not random, it is organized, it is structured, it is deliberate. The first thing they taught me was simple, but it stayed with me. We do not attack blindly, we ask questions. Most people think witches just pick victims at random, but that is not how it works. We study you, we observe you, we observe you. We build a picture of who you are because every person has a weak moment, a weak place, a weak connection somewhere. Our job is to find it. And once we do, everything else becomes easier. I wasn't powerful in the beginning. I didn't cast spells and I didn't travel far, but I had something they valued. I could get people to talk. I could sit in a normal conversation, smile, nod, and ask questions that didn't raise suspicion, that made me useful. They trained me carefully, teaching me how to blend into everyday life, how to sound natural, how to ask without seeming like I was asking anything important. But the truth is, those questions were never ordinary. My first real assignment came not long after. It was a woman named Mrs. S., a trader in Norcan Market. She was doing well, too well, in fact, and that alone was enough to draw attention. But before anything could be done, information had to be gathered, and that responsibility fell to me. I approached her the way anyone would, casually, without pressure, and I began to ask what seemed like simple things. I asked her what time she usually slept. It sounded harmless, just a normal question in conversation, but it wasn't. You see, that question helps locate a door. Some people are strongest at night, others are weakest. If we know when you sleep, we know when your spirit is least active, and that is when attacks are easiest. Then I asked if she prayed at night. Again, it sounded like nothing, but it told us everything. When she said she was usually too tired, that answer was noted. It meant there was no midnight defense, and that meant she was open. I asked where she kept her money. People often think that's just curiosity, but it's not. It reveals patterns, how you store things, how you manage your resources. With that, economic attacks can be assigned, losses can be introduced, unexpected expenses can begin to show up. Then I asked what she ate before sleeping. That one goes deeper than most realize because food has its place spiritually. If we understand your habits, it becomes possible to influence what happens to you at night, even through dreams. And then I, F, who she was closest to. That question often feels like simple friendship talk, but it maps access. Sometimes the direct route isn't used. That sometimes the path goes through someone you trust, someone close enough to reach you without resistance. When I gathered everything, I returned to the meeting. There was no celebration, no excitement. They simply said, "Now we can enter." That was all. And that night, I saw something I have never forgotten. A woman stepped forward, and her eyes were not normal. She belonged to what we call the mirroring kingdom. What she spoke calmly and said, she spoke calmly and said, she eats late and sleeps immediately. That, just like that, was identified as the entry point. Heavy food before sleep made the spirit slow, easier to reach. Then another presence appeared, tall and cold, from what we called the Serpentine Kingdom. He said she trusted one woman too much, and that trust became the channel. That same week, things began to change for her. Her goods started spoiling. Money began to disappear. Strange dreams followed. But she never knew where it began. It all started with simple questions, and I want you to understand this carefully. Sometimes the person asking these questions doesn't even know they are being used. Conversations can be influenced. Curiosity can be guided. Questions can be placed into someone's mind without them realizing it. So even a friend, someone close to you, can unknowingly become part of something deeper. That was the world I was in. Quiet, patient, and always asking. I continued in that role, and before long, I was given another assignment, one that carried more weight because the target was not an ordinary person. This time, it was a prayerful pastor in Port Harcourt, and people like that are not easy to approach, let alone attack. So the method remained the same, but the questions had to go deeper, more precise, and more careful. I approached through someone close to him because direct access is rarely the first step. The questions sounded normal, just like before, but each one carried a purpose. I asked what scripture he prayed with the most. That alone revealed his spiritual pattern, the direction of his prayers, and how he defended himself. Once that is known, countermeasures can be prepared. Then I asked if he fasted often. The answer to that determines timing. If the person fasts regularly, attacks are delayed. If not, they can begin immediately. I asked if he had ever been anointed before. That tells us about covering, about resistance, about how much pressure can be applied. Then came that often does the most damage. I asked what he had been struggling with lately. It sounds like concern, like someone simply trying to understand, but whatever is spoken in that moment becomes a point of focus. It becomes a place to aim at. We gathered everything we could, carefully, patiently, but when the time came to act, something unexpected happened. The first attempt failed, then the second failed, and even after trying again, we were pushed back. That doesn't happen often, and when it does, it forces attention. So we went back to the questions, looking for something we might have missed. There was one question we asked someone close to him. We asked, does he pray at midnight? The answer came back clearly every single night. That one answer explained everything. It was enough to block what we were trying to do. That was the first time I began to question things quietly within myself because I realized something important. Not everyone can be destroyed. Some people are covered in ways that are difficult to break, and that is part of why I am speaking to you now, because many people go through life unaware that they have already been studied, already been asked questions, already been mapped out in ways they never noticed. Nothing about it feels dramatic at the time. It feels like normal conversation, like everyday interaction. But underneath, something else is happening. You see, the process is never random. It begins with observation, then questions, then understanding. Only after that does anything else follow. But what many people are not prepared, dial. Four is the next stage when the questioning is no longer casual. It becomes intentional and it becomes personal. And it becomes personal. After the failed attempt on that pastor, I was called into a deeper meeting. This one was different. Not everyone was present, only those who had moved higher within that system. There was no noise, no confusion, just a clear instruction. They told me, you will no longer just ask questions, you will become the question. At first, I didn't fully understand what that meant, but that changed when they gave me the next assignment. The target was a young man in Lagos. His name was Chindad Okafor. He lived in Surulere, and from what I was told, his business was growing. He was disciplined, focused, and he had a prayer life, though not consistent. That inconsistency was enough. I was not sent to attack him immediately. That was not the plan. Instead, I was sent to enter his life, to become part of his world in a way that felt natural to him. I was to become someone he could trust, someone he could talk to, someone he could lean on without hesitation. Because once a person trusts you, they will answer questions without resistance. They won't see anything wrong with it. It becomes normal. So I entered his life carefully, without force, without urgency. I listened more than I spoke at first. I paid attention. Then, gradually, I began to ask the kind of questions that open doors. I asked him what scared him the most. I asked him what scared him the most. It sounded like a personal question, the kind people ask when they are getting closer, but it was not about emotion. It was about understanding fear, because fear is one of the easiest ways to gain entry. When he told me he was afraid of failure, afraid of losing everything he had worked for, I knew immediately that this was a point that could be used. Then I asked about his dreams, what he usually saw when he slept. Dreams are not just random eye mages, they can become pathways. When he said he sometimes saw himself being chased or losing things, that told me his dream life already had openings. I asked if he believed everyone around him was genuine. It sounded light, almost like a passing thought, but it revealed how aware he was of his surroundings. When he laughed and said, "Not everyone is bad," I understood that he would not suspect me. That made things easier. Then I asked when he last prayed. Seriously, that question required a pause. He thought about it before answering, and when he finally said it had been a while, that answer alone created space. It was enough to begin. But the assignment did not end with gathering information. That was only the beginning. I stayed in his life not as someone passing through, but as someone consistent. I became someone he could rely on. I listened when he spoke. I encouraged him when he needed it. I made myself available in ways that felt supportive, even helpful. But slowly, without drawing attention to it, I began to shift things. I distracted him from prayer, just a little at a time. I made certain compromises feel normal. I introduced small changes in behavior that didn't seem serious on their own, and he didn't notice it happening. Behind the surface, other forces were involved. The Serpentine Kingdom does not rush. Its role is to corrupt gradually, to influence over time, rather than destroy immediately. The instruction was simple: make him depend on you, not on God. And over time, that began to take effect. Then came the involvement of the marine agents. Their role is different. They deal with emotional attachment, with connection, with bonds that go deeper than simple friendship. That was when my role changed again. I was no longer just a friend. I became something more to him, something that drew him closer without resistance. And this is where many people fail to recognize what is happening, because when emotions become involved, clarity begins to fade. Decisions are no longer made carefully. Boundaries become weaker. Before a full attachment is formed, more questions are asked, and these are not simple at all. I asked him if he saw a future with me. That may sound like a normal question in a relationship, but it is not always about romance. It can become a form of agreement, something deeper than words. Then I asked if he would ever choose me over his faith. That question reveals what truly holds control in a person's life. And I asked what his greatest weakness was at that moment. That question, more than most, can open everything. After those answers, things began to change around him. His business started to decline. The discipline he once had became weaker. His prayer life faded completely. And over time, he became dependent on me in a way that made it difficult for him to step back and see clearly. That was the assignment, and I followed it the way I had been taught, step by step, question by question, without rushing, without noise, just steady movement toward the goal. That assignment stayed with me longer than the others, but not because it was difficult in the way you might think. It was because something in it began to feel different. Up until that point, everything had been about adults, about people who could speak, decide, and respond. But then I was given another assignment, and this time the targets were not adults, they were children. Now, children are not approached the same way. You don't sit them down and ask direct questions the way you would with an adult. Everything becomes softer, more playful, more innocent on the surface. But the intention underneath does not change, it remains the same. I would approach them gently, with kindness, with a tone that felt safe. Then I would ask simple Thai. Am I asked? I would ask what they like to eat the most. That might sound like nothing at all, just a normal question you would ask a child, but food can become a gateway, especially for them. Then I would ask if they had bad dreams. If the answer was yes, that was enough. Those dreams could be amplified, made stronger, more frequent. I would ask who they loved the most. That answer creates a connection point, someone who can be used as a channel. Then I would ask if they prayed before sleeping. If they said no, it meant they were easier to reach at night, easier to disturb. There was one child I remember clearly, a little girl in Abadan. After she was marked, things began to happen to her. She started having constant nightmares. She would wake up screaming, calling for help, afraid in a way that no child should be. And I knew without any doubt that we had caused it. That was when something began to shift inside me. It was sudden and it was dramatic. It was quiet, the kind of realization that settles slowly. I started to question what I was part of. Before then, everything had been framed as power, as control, as strategy. But now I could see it for what it really was. It was destruction, plain and simple. Still, the assignment with Chindu continued, and then something happened that I did not expect. After months of everything, of influence, of distraction, of gradual change, He said something to me one night that stayed with me. He looked at me, not confused, not emotional, but aware, in a way I hadn't seen before. He said, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm losing myself. I need to go back to God. That moment changed the direction of everything. That same night, he prayed, not casually, not out of habit, but seriously, with intention. And when he did, it was felt. The connection we had built began to weaken. The access we once had started to break. The control that had been steady began to slip. In that system, things like that don't go unnoted. That same night, I was summoned urgently. There was no delay, no waiting, and when I arrived, the message was clear. If he continues like this, you will lose him. You have to understand what that means in that context. Failure is not something that is overlooked. It carries consequences, serious ones, and at that point, I could already see where things were heading. This is where everything begins to come apart. And there is no more hiding behind process or routine. This is where the truth shows itself clearly. Up until then, I had followed instructions, done what was required, asked the right questions. But now, the system itself was being challenged, not by force, not by argument, but by something as simple as one person choosing to return to prayer. And that is when I began to understand something more deeply. What we were doing was not about noise or chaos. It was patient. It was structured. It was built on small steps that seemed harmless at the beginning. Questions, conversations, relationships. That was how everything started. But when that structure begins to fail, the response is not calm. It changes quickly. After Chandu started praying again, everything shifted. The same access we once had began to close. The influence that had been steady started to disappear. Around 1:43 a.m., there was what we called an emergency summons. This time, it was not like before. I didn't move into that meeting on my own. I was pulled forcefully without warning. And when I arrived, the atmosphere was different from anything GI had experienced before. There was no calm discussion, no careful planning. There was only anger. No one greeted me. No one asked how things were going. The first thing they said was direct. You have become emotionally attached to the target. In that system, that alone is a serious offense. Because once emotion enters, control begins to weaken. Then one of the entities stepped forward, one I recognized from before. The presence was cold, quiet, but heavy. He said, you were sent to destroy, not to sympathize. There was no anger in his voice, but the weight of it was clear. Then he asked me a question, the kind of question I had asked others so many times. Where does your loyalty lie? And for the first time since I had entered that system, I did not have an answer ready. After that, another presence spoke, one from the marine side. Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that made the meaning clear. She said, if the target escapes, you will replace him. That meant exactly what it sounded like. If I failed, I would become the one who would be dealt with. Many people do not know this part. When someone in that system fails, they can lose their protection. They can be subjected to things that are difficult to explain. They can be removed completely. Nothing about it is taken lightly. That night, they did not end things immediately. Instead, they did something else. I felt a shift within me, like something was being taken away. My strength, my confidence, the sense of control I had always known, it began to leave. Then I was given a clear condition: 3 days. That was all. 3 days to complete the assignment, to finish what had been started with Chinda, or face what would follow. For the first time, I hesitated, not because I had suddenly become good, but because I understood what was at stake. I had seen what happened to those who failed, uh, and I knew I was now standing in that position. On the second night, I went to see him again. Chindu, the same person I had been sent to bring down. Even then, part of that system in me was still active, still pushing me to complete what I had been told to do. Yes, so I asked him one more set of questions, carefully, directly. I asked him if he still believed that God could hear him. If his answer had been no, there was still a path to finish everything. Then I asked if he was sure he could change. That question is meant to introduce doubt, to make a person question their own direction. And I asked him, what if nothing improved? That question is designed to remove hope, to make effort feel useless. But this time, something was different. He didn't answer the way he had before. He looked at me clearly, without confusion, without hesitation, and he said, even if nothing changes, I will still pray. That one sentence changed everything. That one sentence did not sound loud, and it did not come with any force, but it carried something that I could not ignore. The moment he said it, I felt it immediately. The connection we had built over time snapped completely and without warning. The access we once had was gone. The control we had maintained disappeared all at once. There was nothing left to hold on to. That same night, I was taken again, but this time it was different. There was no discussion waiting for me, no questions, no attempt to understand what had happened. It was judgment, direct and final. The words were simple: you failed. In that moment, I knew exactly what that meant. I was about to be removed, used as an example, a warning to others. And then something happened that I had never done before in my life. Not something rehearsed, not something I had heard others say, but something that came from a place I had ignored for a long time. From deep within me, without planning it, I cried out, Jesus, help me. I want you to understand this clearly. There is something that that system cannot stand against, and it is not empty words or repeated phrases. It is genuine surrender. Not something spoken casually, but something real, something desperate and honest. The moment I said that name, everything changed. The environment around me shifted. What had been solid began to break apart. The gathering scattered. The entities that had surrounded me disappeared. The hold they had over me was gone. The next thing I knew, I was back in my room on the floor, shaking, crying, but free. For a while after that, I could not rest properly. Sleep did not come easily. My mind kept returning to everything I had seen, everything I had done, the questions, the methods, the people whose lives had been affected. And I realized something I could not ignore. I could not remain silent about it because what I had been part of operates quietly. It does not announce itself. It moves through ordinary conversations, through simple questions, through relationships that seem harmless. So I began to speak, not to create fear, but to make something clear. Not every question you are asked is as simple as it sounds. When someone asks about your fears, your habits, your prayer life, your struggles, it may seem like concern or curiosity. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it is not. You have to be careful about what you reveal without thinking, because information, when placed in the wrong hands, can be used in ways you do not. Not every relationship that enters your life is there by chance. Some come with purpose, and that purpose is not always good. I learned that defense is real. There is a reason some people cannot be easily brought down. It is not luck, it is not coincidence. It is because they remain connected to God. They stay alert. They do not leave their lives open without awareness. If there is one thing I would have you remember, it is this: what you say carelessly can be used against you in ways you may not understand at the time. Words matter, awareness matters. I am telling you this not as someone guessing, but as someone who was once inside that system, who followed its structure, who asked those questions, who saw how it worked step by step. My name is Amara Okafor, and I was once part of that world. What followed after that moment was not something I can easily describe as simple or quick. Freedom, when it comes after something like that, does not feel like a celebration at first. It feels quiet. It feels unfamiliar. I had spent years operating within a system that was structured, controlled, and intentional, and now I was outside of it, trying to understand what that meant for me. I began to reflect on everything, not in a rushed way, but carefully, the same way I had once been trained to observe others. I thought about the questions I had asked, the conversations I had been part of, and how ordinary they all seemed at the time. Nothing about them looked dangerous on the surface. That is what makes it effective. It does not come loudly, it comes in ways that feel normal. I also understood something else very clearly. Many people are not aware of how much they reveal about themselves in everyday conversations. It is not done with bad intention. It is simply how people connect, but without awareness. That openness can create access. And once a cloud, access. And once a create, S is given, it can be used. I am not telling you this to make you suspicious of everyone around you. That is not the point. The point is to be mindful, to understand that not everything is as simple as it appears, and that your life, your habits, your spiritual state, all of it matters more than you may think. There is also something important about consistency. I saw it myself. When that pastor prayed at midnight consistently, it made a difference. When Chindu returned to prayer, even after drifting away, it changed everything. Not instantly in appearance, but in reality, where it matters most. That consistency created a kind of stability that could not easily be broken. Paul, so when I look back at everything now, I do not see it the way I used to. I no longer see strategy as something impressive or clever. I see the damage it caused, the lives it affected, and how easily it all began with something as simple as a question. If you take anything from what I have said, let it be this: be aware of what you share. Be mindful of the patterns in your life. Stay grounded in what protects you, because the difference between being vulnerable and being secure is often found in small, consistent choices. I have told you my story the way it happened, without changing the names, without adjusting the events, and without adding anything extra to it. It is not something I am proud of, but it is something I have chosen not to hide. Thank you for staying with me and listening all the way through. If this has given you something to think about, then take a moment to subscribe and share it with someone who may need to hear it. And thank you for watching this video.